I've decided to put up some thoughts about Africa. As many of you know, I spent uh, nearly 2 years in Africa, and starting in 2018, I went through about 8 different countries, and then another two or three in 2020 and 21, 22. And I spent a lot of time in Rwanda, Burundi, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Kenya, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Ghana, DRC, Congo, and Zambia. And while I was in these countries, I met with important leaders, particularly agricultural leaders, because got a lot of expertise in agriculture, particularly sustainable agriculture or no tillage, or some people call it now regenerative agriculture. And the potential for Africa is really tremendous in agriculture. I believe that they could feed the world 2 times over with the current population, and that could be largely without knocking over too many or hardly any trees at all, because there are a lot of areas in Africa where bushfires run rampant with lightning strikes, and they take out trees. And when they take out the trees, grasses grow, and so those grasses can grow 2 to 3 to 4 5 meters tall, and every time that grass is burned, it releases nutrients, so potassium and lime. So the land is effectively getting burnt once or twice a year in large chunks of Africa. There are certainly some small shrubbed areas in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, that if you were to do broad scale agriculture like we do in the West, you would have to remove quite a few trees there, but there's large portions that wouldn't need to remove trees. So from an environmental concern, if people really are concerned about removing trees in Africa, they probably should be aware that in the Congo, where I was based for nearly 2 years, every day between Kinshasa and Matadi, you would pass dozens, if not hundreds, of trucks that were just roaring big, tall timber out through the port of Matadi. And they're typically being taken out by Chinese companies or Chinese Communist Party, because often that they are sort of one and the same thing. So I don't know how, if people are worried about climate change, then I'm addressing that basically in this little discussion. There's also about 2,000 million hectares of arable land that I've mapped on Google Earth Pro, and of that available for agriculture, and of that probably only, apart from South Africa, maybe 2 or 3% is being used, and maybe 5% might be used for subsistence agriculture. When I remember at school, we used to learn about subsistence agriculture or culture. So what they do is typically, and they still do it, is that they believe in organic farming, which is not a very efficient farming. Not many farmers in the West do organic because it tends to fail, because you're taking stuff out of the soil and you're not putting it back in, and you have to put it back in. That's called a budget. So it's just straight maths. What you take out, you've got to put back in. So what typically happens in this subsistence sort of agriculture is that they burn, as I said before, they burn residue, and that puts lime and potassium and a bit of sulfur, a bit of potash, a bit of phosphorus as well, and trace elements. And that ash can get washed into the soil with the brain, and then you plant your crop and you can extract that out. And then after 2 years or 3 years, or maybe even less, the soil now becomes quite infertile. So you now have to knock down more area and start again, and get the ash to get the nutrients out of the ash. And of course, as you know, trees have got deep roots, and those roots go down into 4, 5, 6, 10 meters deep into the soil. So they're sucking out nutrients that are down at depth. And so it's sort of a recycling thing. It's pulling it from down deep and then it's putting it up to the surface. But once it gets to the surface and the grain gets harvested, it then gets taken off as grain or fodder for cattle, and then it goes through the digestive systems of people or animals, and then what's left over gets put back on as manure. But As you can imagine, our stomach is designed to take goodies out of the soil. So we're taking goodness, nutrients out of the soil into our stomach. We're breaking it down, digesting it, and some of the nutrients are going back, but some of them are not. And so the amount of fertilizer you get from manure is very minimal, very minimal. You have to put enormous amounts on. So organic farming really is a weak system, and that's why we just don't do it in Western Australia. There's one or two farmers that do, but I was talking to a good farmer, a friend of mine from up at Perenjori, just this last week, and I said, "What happened to the organic farmer that you had next door to you?" And he said, "Oh, he passed away, and his brother-in-law, I think, took over the farm and immediately put fertilizer on it so that he could grow decent crops again." So it just doesn't, I've taken people around the world, farmers from all over Australia, probably 20 times with my wife, to America, to Canada, to South Africa, to South America, to Argentina, Brazil, Chile, been to New Zealand, of course, and been to China with the groups, study tour groups. And on all of these trips, I'd ask my 30 to 50 farmers, I'd say, hands up those of you in your agricultural area across southern Australia that have known an organic farmer. And up would go every hand. And then it'd say, right, well, leave your hand up if that person is still farming. And pretty much every time, all the hands go down. Occasionally one or two stay up, and one went half down one time. I said, "Daniel, why is your hand half down?" He said, "Well, he's still hanging in there by the skin of his teeth." So, they're not often productive. Organic food is a nice romantic idea, but the reality is we need to take nutrients out of the soil because that's what we eat. We don't put them back. We bring the nutrients to the city, and when they've come to Perth, nearly 2 million people in Perth, I know a guy called Owen, and Owen is one of two farmers that takes all the effluent or poo from Perth, and he puts it on his farm with another guy. And that two farms out of nearly 3,700 large farms in WA, and so just two farms can get organic material from Perth's effluent to run their farm. And in fact, that's not enough fertiliser to grow his good crops, so he has to complement it with phosphorus and nitrogen and potassium and sulfur and lime. So the idea of organics is romantic, but the reality is it's not going to work. Now, the reason I tell you that is because when I went to Burundi, I had a letter from Barry Court. Barry was given a letter by the president of Burundi, and Barry's a good friend of mine, Barry and Margaret Court, famous tennis player, who is also a pastor at Victory Life Church here in Perth. Lovely couple, and Barry and Margaret became friends with the president of Burundi. And when I was in Burundi, I met a lot of people that knew the president before he was the president. And he came into faith through these people that I met, Christian faith. And anyway, he wrote a letter to Barry to say, "Look, I'll give you 500 hectares. You show me how to farm the way you farm in Western Australia." So Barry gave me this letter and said, "Listen, Bill, I'm a bit old. You're a bit younger. How about you go and have a go?" So that was one of the main reasons for me selling the farm at Morawa. And we farmed 5,500 hectares up near Geraldton, a very dry area, and we had quite a few dry years just towards the end of our farm. It's been very good since we've left farming, and that's I would have loved to have benefited from those financially good years, but anyway, we didn't. We heard the call and went to Africa, and we tried to teach farmers over there how to grow good crops efficiently on large scale, because that's what they need. We often hear about droughts in Africa. Well, compared to where I farm, they never have a drought, because one year I had 80 mils of rain for the whole year in my growing season. I still managed 400 kilos per hectare of wheat, which is not enough. You need a ton I did need a ton back then to make it pay the bills. But anyway, so with this letter, I went to Burundi, and but sadly, the president didn't agree with the COVID rules, and so he was first at second-hand knowledge that I can tell you, he was likely poisoned, and because he didn't go along with the World Economic Forum's strict lockdown rules on COVID. So I didn't get to meet with him, but I did get to meet with his Minister for Agriculture, and he said, well, here in Burundi we're organic, and so we don't use fertilizers and we don't use herbicides. And I said, well, you could, and then you'd grow better crops. And he said, yeah, well, that's not our policy. And then I also found out that they'd shut down the fertilizer imports, and so the government officials were making money off selling organic phosphorus fertilizer, which is rock phosphate, which can work sometimes, but it's tough. But anyway, it's not as efficient as imported, modified and improved fertilizers. So I thought to myself, well, with no good fertilizers like we use here in Australia and no herbicides, what hope is there in me being a useful contributor to change in Burundi? And after 2 months, I thought, no, I'm going to leave. So I got another invitation from the president of Congo's right-hand man. His name was Fortunate. And unfortunately for Fortunate, he's now been put in jail. But he did offer me 5,000 hectares, even though I didn't ask for that. I said, look, 1,000 hectares would be plenty. He offered that to me, but I never gave him any brown paper bag money. Now that's a problem. And that's a problem typically across a lot of Africa. And, Africa's interesting because they came from tribal groups, and those tribal groups were involved in raids on each other's tribes, back hundreds, probably thousands of years ago. And in those raids, they would steal other people's children and young men, young boys, young girls, use them as slave labour and probably worse. And that was part of their culture. And they also had witchcraft as part of their culture. There is good evidence too of some Jewish traditions coming down through Bathsheba's interaction with Solomon, and I think the genetics show that there is some Jewish heritage in Ethiopia and further down. So some of their cultures sort of picked up some of that, and then of course Christianity has come into Africa, and more recently it's come in quite strongly, and particularly the strong faith stuff that says, which I there's a stream called prosperity doctrine in the Christian faith, and while it's true, certainly in the texts of the Bible, there's plenty of verses that says, my intention is good for you in Jeremiah, not to harm you, but to prosper you and to bless you. That's certainly all true. And in Christendom and in Judaism, where people follow the Ten Commandments and do things right, then there is certainly a blessing that does come from that. And however, the hyper faith sort of idea that you speak it and you can take it, has really taken root, and it sort of mixes quite well in a not so positive way with the chief attitude, the man with power. So the king or the chief has the power, and you submit to him, and he protects you. And in Christianity, the pastor now has the power, and if you bless the pastor and give to the church, God will give back to you 100 times. There's that sort of teaching. And while there's truth to that, and tithing is certainly an important part of Christianity, we do witness the 12 apostles. I think John was the only one that wasn't murdered for his faith, which really suggests that they really believed Jesus was raised from the dead. So that's so not all of Christendom. And Stephen, he was an apostle. He was named as one of 7 right at the beginning of the book of Acts, if you ever read Acts. He was nominated as one of the people that would be helping the poor and the widows and the orphans, and he was charged with that job. And he stood up and he spoke boldly, and when they said, you've got to stop talking about this Jesus, and he said, I can't, basically I can't. And he then gave them a big lecture, and he said, he gave them the history of Exodus and in the wilderness, and Moses and Joshua, and and all the kings of Israel, and he gave a beautiful speech. And then at the end of that speech, he said to them, you brood of you scumbags, basically, you've killed Jesus, who was sent to be our saviour. So he was stoned to death, and instantly, and it's a beautiful passage to read because Stephen looks up into heaven, his face glows, and you sort of wonder if he even felt one of those stones because he was just God took him. Very similar, I think, to Charlie Kirk. Actually, I've got a lot of respect for Charlie, and you can look at him on YouTube ad nauseum, and his theology is very close to mine, 99.9%, I'd say, and that's unusual in the Christian world to totally agree with someone, but Charlie was just magnificent. So if you want to know my theological views, listen to some of Charlie's videos. But basically, the Bible can be trusted from the beginning to the end. So back to Africa. Africa's now gone through this. Reinhard Bonnke was very influential in Africa 20 years ago. A lot of people saw incredible miracles, and many people came into Christianity. And Reinhardt's saying was, Africa shall be saved or will be saved. You know, they'll embrace Christianity. Well, they have, but they've also they've held on to some of their ancient witchcraft technologies or tools, and that in the biblical sense could be called Balaam's error. If you want to Google what Balaam's error was, you can't have two gods. So Africa is sort of in this trap of prosperity doctrine and worshipping the king or the pastor almost, and expecting God to give them great blessings, and and there's certainly that's true. We should honour our pastor, but our pastor should be an honourable person too, and we should respect our leaders, but our leaders are there to protect us and keep us safe and guide us. And our leaders should be, and the pastors should be, upholding the Ten Commandments, which were not just good for Jews, they were good for us. Admittedly, the Christians don't go strongly on the commandment to the fourth commandment to rest on the Sabbath, but Paul says, choose what you want. Which day do you want to rest on? And so I'm comfortable with the first day was the day that Jesus rose from the dead, which is a Sunday. So a lot of Christians worship on a Sunday, but one day a week is certainly very important. But when it comes to Africa and what it thinks about the Ten Commandments, I heard Charlie Kirk's pastor give a sermon not long after Charlie died, and he went through the Ten Commandments. Very good little useful overview that he gives, and he goes, one is to, first commandment is we're to worship God. There's one God. Second commandment is we don't have any other gods, and we don't bow down to any other gods. The third commandment is we don't take his name in vain, Jesus Christ or God, or any word that invokes God's name. The fourth commandment is to rest on the Sabbath, and the fifth commandment is fifth commandment is to honour your parents, and the sixth commandment is do not murder, using your fingers. It's very helpful. Seventh, hold up two fingers and put 5 on your other hand. That's 7, and that is you have 2 in a marriage, not 5. 8 is both hands you do this, so you chop your thumb off basically. And what would you do that for? For stealing. So do not steal. That's 4 plus 4 is 8. And then 9 it's 4, not 5. So one hand's 4 and one hand's 5. And so 4, you don't call 5 4, and you don't call 4 5. So we don't lie. And then number 10 is 2 hands going like this. Don't covet. Don't want to steal what other people have got. So when I worked that out, thanks to McCoy, I think his name is, in America, I found that really helpful because now I can remember all the 10 Commandments quite handy. Before then I could only remember 7 or 8. But Africa needs to not covet, needs to learn this as a nation. They also need to not steal. While we were there, they stole our grain twice. People that we were working with, they thought, they don't need it, we'll just steal it. And then they lied about it. So lying is number 8. So they break number 8, number 9, number 10, and they don't just have one God. They often worship a second God. So there's 5 commandments there that they're breaking, the Christians that we're working with, consistently. Now, this is why Africa, Donald Trump calls it, what do you call it? Hellhole or a basket case or a shithole, I think he said. So if you don't stick with the 10 Commandments as a society, then you're ruined. And if you don't have laws that everyone keeps and that they're enforced, right from the top of the government down to the lowest people, then you're inviting a curse on your land. And that's what I think has happened to Africa. I think they've been cursed. They've been cursed because they haven't stuck to the Ten Commandments, especially now they're Christians. They've got no excuse. I mean, Jesus summed up the Ten Commandments in 2 commands. He said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, mind, and love your neighbour as yourself, the 2 commandments. So if you love your neighbour as yourself, you're not going to steal, you're not going to cheat, you're not going to covet. And if you love God, you're not going to honour any other God. You're going to honour Jesus, who is God. And we know that for those that have been born again, that have said to God, reveal yourself to me, and then you have a dream. A lot of Muslims are having these, and they see Jesus in the dream, and then they say, okay, Jesus, come into my life, and then their life gets changed, their spirit gets born again. Jesus said you won't get to heaven unless you're born again. So Africa's had this born again experience, but they've got Balaam's error. They're trying to worship another god, and they're trying to use a bit of witchcraft. And I've had pastors steal. Well, I've got a Toyota still stuck in Zambia because of a pastor. He's got my Toyota and my gold detecting stuff, and he stole my grain. He said he didn't get the money for it, but just slippery words. And you won't be blessed doing that. We're all going to meet our Maker at the end of our life, and these people that have been doing this is just not good. I've got a brother, my brother that's older than me. I'm number 9 in the family. He's number 7. And he just kept getting Facebook connected to African and orphanages and pastors, and they've got a radio station in Uganda, and they just took so much money from him, and they whipped him basically. They said, the kids are going to die, and if you don't send money. So being kind-hearted sort of brother that he is, he sent money and after money after money, nearly $1 million Australian dollars, and it's pretty much destroyed his retirement plans and put a lot of stress between him and his wife and daughter and first wife as well, and and stepdaughter and me. It's trying to pull him out of the clutches of guilt that the Africans can put on white people for. Orphanages are not always orphans. They are sometimes. I know many wonderful people in Africa that are doing great orphanage work, but sometimes a family can have 10 kids and they put several of them in the orphanage because it's easier to have them be fed there. So mum and dad are still alive. So it's not what we think of in the West, but it's children that have been put into this place. So, it's a pretty sobering thought. So if you're giving money to orphanages in Africa, just double check and don't be sucked in too much, like my brother was, sadly. Anyway, I pray for my brother regularly, and I hope he comes well, but he had to spend time in a mental hospital to try and recover from the stress that put him under. So back to Africa. So Africa is being convinced that they have to be organic, and I think that's a strategy to steal from Africa. Let me explain why. If you're poor and you don't have enough money to get food, then buy food, then you have to go and make food. So when you're making food in an organic sense, you can't make very much. So you have to spend a lot of your time physically weeding and going and getting cow or something poo or effluent or something from somewhere to put with the seed so that you can grow some crop, or chop the forest down or chop the grass down and burn it. So this organic system, it's not sustainable. It's not regenerative. It's degenerative. It's taking stuff out and you're not putting back in. So and Africa's been convinced that they should be organic. And I think they have to spend 90% of their time collecting food. Then they've got 10% of their time to do something else. So, but if they were to adopt technology that we have adopted here in Western Australia, or South Australia, Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland, or anywhere in Canada or the US, and I've spent a lot of time, I lived for a year in Canada, or Argentina, or Brazil. Brazil's very similar to Congo. They are able to grow incredible crops. And I'm not talking about the Amazon jungle, I'm talking about the Cerrado region, where they do have trees there and they do have plains as well. You can improve that soil tremendously by putting fertiliser on, particularly lime. When I was putting lime, which is white stuff, on the soil in Menkau near Kinshasa, a lady walked past on the road. She started yelling at us and waving a finger. Rah, 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 rah. And I said to Jency, who was working with us, I said, "What's she saying, Jency?" And he said, "She's telling us that we're poisoning the soil. We shouldn't put chemical on the soil." Well, if anyone knows anything about lime and acid soils, the soil is poison because it's acid. It's got a pH of 3.9 in calcium chloride, of 4.6 in water, which is, you can't grow hardly anything in that. You're restricting the roots. You're burning the roots with chemical. And that chemical is aluminium. When the pH drops below, and you can listen to a podcast, Four Farmers Podcast, Steve Carr. Steve's an expert on lime, and I talked to him for 50 minutes, so you could have a look at that if you wanted to. But so I say that to just demonstrate that I understand a bit about what I'm saying here, that lime is essential, and if you don't use it, then your soil will become acidic, because agriculture is an acidifying process. Everything we harvest off the soil is basically alkaline. So you keep taking alkaline material out, which is similar to our teeth. Our teeth are alkaline, and that they will dissolve in acid. You've heard the story, drink Coke and you dissolve your teeth. Well, acid plus lime, your teeth, gives a base plus a water. So you turn a salt. So your teeth basically turn to salt and dissolve. So what we need is not to have the soil too acidic, because it burns the roots, because aluminium gets released and the aluminium burns the roots, simply put. So you have to put lime on. So these people don't even know that you have to put lime on the soil. So that's the first thing you have to do. Then you put the N, P, K and S, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, sulfur. They're the big ones. Calcium, magnesium are the next two. And then the trace elements, copper, zinc, molybdenum, manganese. Different plants have a different requirement for different of these trace elements. Iron is also a trace element. Sodium's also been discovered as a trace element requirement. So, so there's about 13 nutrients that you need. And if you're taking them out of the soil, you've got to put them back in. So Africa's doing this organic farming, and they're not growing very good crops. Their yield is typically half a tonne per hectare of maize. It should be 10 tonnes per hectare. It should be 20 times more than what it is. Now, if they're growing 20 tonnes per hectare, 10 tonnes per hectare, probably twice a year, just about could, because you've got some seasons, you've got 2 seasons in 1 year, or some areas, depends how close you are to the equator. If you're within 6 degrees, you can pretty much grow 2 crops, plus a third crop in the cool season if you've got irrigation. So there's no need for Africa to go hungry. They should be growing tremendous crops. They should be growing tremendous crops. So if they can get rid of this organic mindset and adopt agriculture like they do, when they come to the West, they must look at our crops and go, wow, how do they grow that? And if they come to Western Australia, I'll show them the worst soil in the world. I did my honours project on the farm that we grew up near Jerramunga, Bremer Bay, near Albany. It's sandy soil over clay, and that sand has got nothing in it. The native vegetation, even though it's 450 mil rainfall, is not much taller than my head, and it's very thin. You could run through it because there's no fertilisers in the soil. It's got good rainfall. So, but we've turned that into 6 tonne per hectare wheat country, 7 if you do really well, or 3 to 4 tonne per hectare canola country. And it's amazing what we've done to this arid environment that we've got here. So, I could recommend that they copy what we do here. And indeed, that's why I went to Africa, because I thought that I could give impact to them changing their techniques. But they think that the reason we have no children in the Western world is because we're not organic. They think that it's our food, our wheat that we grow, that's making us sterile, or our canola that we grow. Well, we know that in the West that's not true. Lots of people, I had 4 children, I wish I had 8 now, because we see what's happening in the West. We're being invaded by people because we're not replacing ourselves. So we're bringing in people from a different culture, and they're doing, I think, some harm. Certainly there's some that are doing great work, and I work with many that have come from all over the world, and we're happy to have many of them, but we don't need too many. But it's certainly not because of our agriculture that our fertility is down. A lot of people here use the pill. A lot of people don't get married. A lot of people, when they get married, they don't have children. So we've got an average, I don't know what it is, 1.6 or something, but you need 2.3 for every couple to keep your population at the same. And China's going to have a real problem now because they had the one-child policy for 30 years, and now they've virtually no children. Their cities are, their populations are going down. That's a real problem for China. So anyway, back to Africa. They've all got, 5 to 10 children, and they're flat out trying to get enough food for them. Well, if they'd copy our agriculture with our smart plant genetics, with biotechnology, with fertilizers, with liming, they could very quickly, and with scale and with tractors. But who wants to invest like I did in a tractor, in a sprayer, in a plough to level the soil? I'm known as no-till Bill. They're not excited about ploughing, but you've got to do what you've got to do. When the ground's rough, you have to level the ground. So we ploughed the soil, and also to mix the lime in. That was sensible. So you do what you have to do. And so who would want to do what we did, go over there and have everything stolen off us, and even our land? 3 or 4 different people came along. We thought we did the right thing. We got lawyers involved. We checked the paperwork. But in Congo, no. The person that comes along with the biggest gun or the biggest power or the biggest political influence then can take your land off you, and that does great damage to the communities. So we were employing people. We employed, up to 20 people some days when we were working in agriculture in Congo, and these people were very thankful for the $2-3 US a day that we were giving them, and but we're not sustainable because what we were trying to do gets stolen from. You've got to keep the 10 Commandments, Africa, and it goes for your leadership. And it goes for every part of it. Now, if you want to have bribing as part of your system, well, fine. Put in your laws. Then put the bribe in there as a GST, if you like, 20%, 30%. Let everyone know what it is. And then call it what it is. It's a service fee, or it's a greasing the palm fee, or whatever you want to call it, or it's a sliming your way up the pole fee, or whatever you want to call it. Call it something, and then make rules for anyone that breaks those rules to get punished, because then you can protect it. You can't start agriculture on land that someone's going to steal off you. In the West, the way it works here is that we buy the land, it's freehold, and the bank loans us money against that land. I bought a farm, and we often had a $500,000 debt. Land wasn't worth much more than that, and we could borrow against that land, so that if we had a bad year and went broke, we could sell the farm, or the bank would take the land off us, and they'd get their money, and whatever residual was left over, they'd have to give it to us. So, that protects an investment. Then you can get people investing into a project. Well, you can't invest into agriculture in Africa if someone's going to steal your land off you, or if the government owns the land, and then the new government gets put in, and then they've got stronger power, and they're different politically to you, they'll come and take it off you. So 10 Commandments is important, land ownership is important, and good governance is important. And these are some of the things that we really struggled with. And in the end, we had to come home because we just felt that our lives were not safe. And indeed, after we left Menkau, another village came in, several people killed. We saw machete attacks and people chopped up on the road. People sent us videos of these graphic things. So we were glad that we came home. But I just feel very sad for Africa because the potential is huge. Africa could feed the world 2 times over. But you've got to learn to stick to the 10 Commandments. You've got to not believe that the prosperity doctrine it's all about that. As Charlie Kirk had on a beautiful sermon that he gave, a speech that he gave, basically was saying, I'm here. What do you say? I am here. I'm available, or something. Here I am. That's right. He had it written across his shirt. Here I am. Sermon by Charlie Kirk. And what basically that's saying, and Charlie sacrificed his life, I think, a lot like Stephen did. He gave his life, but the ripple effect of Charlie's teaching, Charlie's videos, Charlie's work has been amplified 100-fold probably since he's died. I've met a lot of people that are not even Christians that have been listening to Charlie because he speaks a lot of common sense about a lot of issues, and Africa needs to listen to Charlie Kirk, or just read your Bible and not just pick your favourite verses out of the Bible, which is very tempting for some people to do. We're all tempted to do that. Pick our favourite bit. Confirmational bias, we call it in the scientific world. And as a scientist, I have learnt that Jesus is trustworthy. I have learnt that he does give you the born again experience if you ask him to come in, because we're made of body, soul, and spirit. And souls can be destroyed by the spirit being crushed. And when Jesus says, I come to bring you life and life abundantly, it's very true. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be rich, but in your spirit you'll be rich. And it's about more than money. You know, we lost money by going to Africa. Was that a mistake, a failure? Well, the secular world would say yes, it was. It was a disaster but you know, what do we need? We've got a house, we've got 4 children and 8 grandchildren. We love them to bits. They love us to bits. We got enough food. I eat too much actually. I'd like to try and lose a little bit. It's pretty hard when you get to my age, 65. We're not as active as we used to be. Love watching my sons play touch rugby every Thursday night, and yeah, it's a delight to be here in Australia in a safe place. It's not safe in many places in Africa, especially if you're a white person, because you're racially discriminated against. Everyone, all the police, all the government workers were very happy to extort fees out of us that were not legal. They would find any reason to accuse us of not wearing a seatbelt when we're wearing a seatbelt, not stopping when we did stop. They just make it up. So it's really sickening what happens in Africa not following the 10 Commandments. When they follow the 10 Commandments, when they humble themselves as a community, whole community, the first group that does this, the first country that does this has got agricultural potential, will become very wealthy in agriculture. It requires noble men to stand up, to be brave, to, you know, like when Moses was judging all of Israel in the desert, Jethro, his father-in-law, came along and says, Moses, what are you doing? You're wearing yourself out. You need to choose men that can do what you're doing. You do the hard ones, but let them do the basic ones. So get men that are noble and trustworthy and cannot be bribed, and put them over 1,000, another group over 100, another group over 50, another group over 10. So we need this hierarchical structure to keep us all accountable, because we're all rat bags. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and we sin daily. Sadly, we rely on the grace of God to have our lives enriched and free, so that we can sleep without and forgive people. We can sleep with a good conscience and do good things and really enjoy doing good things. More blessed to give than receive. So Africa, you need to wake up. You need to adopt the 10 Commandments. You need to insist on getting rid of the bribing system, the stealing system, the coveting system. You need to bless people and work with people that are entrepreneurs and have got natural gifting at building businesses. Work with them. Allow them to get richer than you, but work alongside them and allow them to work with you in partnership and protect you. And then get your children employed, and then grow crops that will feed the world. The Arab nation to the north of you doesn't have food. It has lots of oil money, but not food. You can very easily start exporting your food, start growing food enough for you to be able to feed your children and your grandchildren. And then when you adopt this modern agricultural technology, then you'll only be working 20% of your time potentially with mechanisation. And then you can invest the money that you make into mining, and then you can capture your own minerals, your gold. I've seen blood diamonds. It's not too far from the truth. People's hands get chopped off, and yuck. It says a lot about Africa, and sadly there's a fair bit of truth in it. It's a shocking movie, but it's a very powerful movie. I saw it 15 years ago, I think. I can't remember it all, but Africa's got to capture its own diamonds, its own gold, its own coltan, its own metals, copper and zinc and uranium even. You've got lots of it, and but people are stealing from you. And Europe and China and Russia and rich Americans, I'm sure, and probably even some rich Australians, are very happy for you to be poor. So you're so busy trying to get enough food for yourself that you don't have enough energy, time, money, or resources to go and get your own gold, your own diamonds that God's put in your continent for you and for your people, not just for your kings or your chiefs or your politicians or the politicians to be bribed by the international wealthy billionaires. No, it's got to be for you. It's yours. It was put there for you. It's your heritage. It's your destiny. It's your hope. It's your future. It's your children's hope and future. And when you capture your minerals, what will happen then? You'll be able to build an army, and you'll be able to stop anyone from coming in to your boundaries. There's a verse in the Bible that says God puts up the boundaries, the tent posts that protect your land. So get your boundaries, keep your boundaries, get your army, elect noble, honest politicians. Can you find them? Well, there are a few there. I know some of them that should be prime ministers at the moment or presidents. They won the election, but they didn't get given it. So when you as a people rise up and take charge of destiny for yourselves and enforce, encourage, exhort the Ten Commandments, and then you will become a prosperous people. And your people that have travelled all over the world and gone out of Africa, fled from the Rwanda conflict or other conflicts, and you're here in Australia or Canada or America, you want to come back, because that's where the prosperity will be. It'll be in Africa. There'll be jobs for roads, for highways, for probably train tracks, for hydroelectricity power. I mean, you've got an unlimited amount of hydropower. And when you make that hydropower that's excess to your demands, then you can make nitrogen. The Bayer Bosch, I think it was a Haber-Bosch technology to make nitrogen, and nitrogen's the main fertilizer after phosphorus that needs to be used in agriculture. So you'll pour out enormous amounts of energy, potential, jobs. You'll attract the wandering Africans that have gone all over the world. They'll want to come back. They'll see how it works in the Western world, where we have upheld Judeo-Christian values, though we are being diluted at the moment as Islam is trying to take over all of the West. Africa, you could become an inspiration. In 20, 30, 40 years, it would be a place where we'd all want to go and all want to holiday there and see the mighty animals that you've got, that you've been put there. They're not here in Australia. We don't have elephants or giraffes or what you guys have got. You've got an amazing natural beauty. I've seen a lot of it. And your countries can flourish. But you must get rid of corruption. You must have land rights. You need to adopt modern agricultural technology. And I am an expert in modern agricultural technology. And I know it will catapult you. And it'll not just you, but all of your communities, because there's so much there in agriculture. The processing of the food, the production of the food. When you grow soya, and when you grow maize and you put them in rotation like they're doing in Brazil and Argentina, then you've got excess feed. What are you going to do with that? Well, feed cattle, feed pigs, feed chickens, feed sheep. And what will you do with the feed? Well, export it if you want to, or eat it. There is limitless wealth, potential, opportunity in Africa. But you must have good governance. You must have the Ten Commandments. You policemen must stop stealing. You army people must stop raiding and destroying what's not yours, taking bribes. You must stick to the Ten Commandments. You government officials, you must be content with your wage. And if your wage is not good enough, lobby the politicians. Get your countries flowing in agriculture, like South Africa has done. But South Africa is wanting to go back with the bad governance that they've currently got to tribal ways and steal stuff off people. Okay, you could argue, well, the white man shouldn't have been there. Well, when the white man first went to South Africa, there weren't people there right at the tip. Certainly there was when they moved north. But then there were agreements, and I've been told about these agreements. The 62 that died in northern South Africa. There's a story there on YouTube I've been told to look at. But anyway, skin colour is not what it's about. We're to love everybody, every skin. We're to forgive everybody, every skin colour. So if you're a Christian, skin colour's irrelevant, as Charlie Kirk would say. He's not a racist, never was. Charlie was one of the most gracious people under intense heat and fire, and I have the greatest respect for him. So Africa, it's your turn. It's your time. And don't think of that as when your politician gets elected, like they say in DRC, it's our turn now because our group of politicians have got up, so we need to get on the bribery scandal with our powerful politicians. No, it's not what I mean. Or in Mozambique, they've got a saying that wherever your goat is tethered to, there it can graze. That's politicians getting into power so they can graze and eat and devour everything around where their rope will allow them to go. No, that's not what I'm talking about. The whole of the people, the whole communities, you need to rally around the Ten Commandments, the Christian truth, the gospel truth, and your continent, wherever you embrace these freedoms that come with the gospel, the freedom that comes with forgiveness, that Jesus allows us to forgive people that have hurt us, and we've got to forgive, as the Lord's Prayer says. And if we don't forgive, he won't forgive us. So we have no choice but to forgive and work out your salvation with fear and trembling, Africa. There's a verse in the Bible that says that. Now, if you just continue to break the Ten Commandments, heaven help you. God help you at the end of days when your time has come and you stand before your Maker. What's he going to say? Well done, good and faithful servant? Or you shouldn't have done this? Will the grace that you receive in Christ, will that be enough to cover all the sins? I hope so, and I'm not to judge that, because that's where the Bible says do not judge. I believe that's talking about salvation. We certainly need to make sober judgments, as Jesus says, about lots of things. In terms of someone else's salvation, only God knows. So, and only you are going to stand before God. Only I am going to stand before God alone and give an account of my life for myself. So you need to do the same. You will do the same, whether you like it or not. We all will. Be blessed, Africa, and submit, not to Allah. He's not God. Submit to Jesus and his Father. Jesus and the Father are one, and the Holy Spirit, just like you and I, body, soul, and spirit, we're one. I'm one. So submit to love, to joy, to a purpose, a call that's noble, and arise, African agriculture. It's your turn now, through servanthood, through obedience to the Ten Commandments. Thank you for listening.